we have been looking at Solomon as he's looking at life itself and the struggles that he has in understanding. And of course, he's taking on really the persona of those who are looking at life from under the sun without considering life beyond the sun. And that becomes a key to understanding the entirety of the book of Ecclesiastes. Yet there's other things that we have to wrestle with when we come to the book of Ecclesiastes. Is in the first few chapters, there's this monotony of life. Remember that just marches on. You know, that we refer to it sometimes as the treadmill of life. No matter how far you've gone in it, no matter how long our life is, the next day will come, and the next day will come, and the next day will come, and it's just a monotony. And generations of humanity have come and gone and come again, and yet life just continues on this treadmill. And it's difficult for us, and we've said, you know, this is the problem of life without God, is that there's this vanity, this emptiness in life, because there is, as He told us, He has put eternity into our hearts. There's a desire of something beyond just this. And then we reach another problem, and that becomes the problem of life with God, because you know we would almost anticipate that, okay, well that's how people without God view life. They have troubles, but thankfully, when it comes to us with God, we don't have troubles. But that's not the case at all. Solomon continues and he says, look, there's a problem of life with God. And he starts talking about some of the things. For example, he identified injustice. Even though God exists, there is still injustice in this world. Why is there still injustice? Okay, it's a fallen world. The devil is active. People are still in the world. Look, injustice doesn't come from rocks and trees, does it? Injustice comes from people and how people treat people. Is it God's will that people treat others unfairly with inequity? Absolutely not. But there's this tension in the history of mankind between the sovereignty of God and the free will of man, right? Have you ever thought about that tension? The sovereignty of God and free will of man? I mean, that's the question. I believe it was the Oracle at Delphi was one of the first ones to really ask that question, delve into that question. Atheists love using that. You know, if God is all good and all powerful, and He doesn't want bad things to happen, then why do they still happen? You see, either God is all good, but He's not powerful enough to stop bad things, or He's all powerful, but He's not good enough to stop bad things. Either way, He is not God, and therefore there is no God. That has been a sugar stick for atheists, not for a couple of centuries, but really since the beginning, when people started to turn their backs on God and justify their own ways. Well, the only way we can justify bad action is we've got to take God out of the picture, because God says bad actions are bad. So there's this tension between the sovereignty of God, which means that He has all authority, that He has all control. And yet if He has all that control, what about man's free will? And so there's this natural tension between the fact that we get to choose what way we want to go and the fact that God is still in control. And when man is in control of his choices, he can choose poorly, right? And when he does, inequity happens. In chapter 4, we see another one, and it's the idea of oppression. We saw that at the early part of chapter 4 last week. Not only is there an inequity in life, but there are those who are kept down, who are pressed down. They don't get what they truly desire because there's someone who is more powerful than they are that hold them down. And then the irony is that if those who are oppressed ever gain enough power to thwart the oppression and they become those in power, they turn around and do what? They become the oppressors. And we see this throughout history as well. Human history is full of things like that. But we come to another problem, and it's that of miserliness. This is where we were looking last week and finishing off. We'll start actually in verse 8 today. But he says, look, I saw people who toil and all the skill and the outcome, and look, these people are hoarding their money. It's greed upon greed. And then once we are aware of the vanity of the workaholic, the financial pursuit, we may be tempted to just say, well, I don't want to be part of that rat race anymore. I'm just gonna take leisure. And Solomon says, the fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. In other words, you can't go to one extreme or the other. Both are foolishness. And so we get down here to verse 8, and he says, one person who has no other, either son or brothers, yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This also is a vanity and an unhappy business. The greed, or this greed that we have, leads people to valuing things over people. We see this, don't we? There are those in this world who are more interested in more money, more things, more cars, and they put those things ahead of people. Right? I used the word a moment ago, workaholic. What's a workaholic? Yeah, they're addicted to their work. They're not happy unless they're working, right? And so here's this picture of this man or this woman that is so frantic about making sure they're working every minute of every single day. What does that do to their relationships, though? It starts to break those relationships down. Jennifer?
Well, and even those people aren't necessarily, they never become happy. They're trying to find that happiness, but it never comes, and so they keep working harder and harder. And then by the time they have the time to enjoy what they work for, it's often too late.
Yeah. What does he say? They're never satisfied. Now, mind you, why do workaholics work so much? How do they justify? What do they say? Yeah, I'm doing it for the ones I love. Right? Except the problem is in reality, when you're doing it for the ones you love, you're often neglecting the ones that you say you love. And that becomes the catch-22. I can't just say, well, I'm not going to work anymore because I want to spend all the time with my family. How far is that going to get you? You don't go too far with that mentality either. So we do have to work. And as Jennifer noticed, the pleasure that he deprives himself of, and the people that he pulls himself away are the very people he claims to be working for. Charles Dickens' famous character, Ebenezer Scrooge, right? His name is synonymous with a miser, with miserliness, right? He pushed away all of those who would have loved him, and yet his nephew still loved him, didn't he? He still wanted him there, but he didn't want that affection. He didn't desire that thing because people cost money. His greed was never satisfied. He wanted more, and then he wanted some more, and then he wanted more, right? He begrudgingly, remember, let Bob Cratchit put one more coal on the fire. One more coal, because it was getting so cold in the counting house. You can put one more coal. His house was falling apart around him because he didn't want to pay money on repairs. It says that his bedclothes and his blankets were threadbare because he was loath to buy new ones. Well, maybe the people that we know that are caught up in greed aren't quite that bad, but I think Dickens is using this character as a personification of all of what greed does to us. When taken to its final end, here's where greed leads us. And Solomon is telling us the same thing. And he says that his eyes are never satisfied. The things that he sees, the things that he's looking for, the things that he's reaching out for, he's never satisfied. And he never stops to ask this vital question: for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? What's the mantra that Solomon has mentioned already a couple of times in Ecclesiastes, and we'll mention a few more? Eat, drink, and what? Enjoy your labors. Find pleasure. Life on this earth is not just about making it through and hoping that in the end we make it into eternal life. Jesus didn't just come to bring eternal life. In John 10, he says what? I came that they might have life and have it more abundantly. And he's not talking about merely life over on the other side of the sun, life beyond the sun, life in the presence of God. He's talking about life here and now. There's a godly principle in enjoying life here and now. Dale, did you have your hand up a second ago? Okay, all right, sorry. And he says, this also is an unhappy business. Now, we're almost shocked then when we come to verse 9. Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. And he's going to go into man's companions, the social nature of mankind. And it almost seems out of place, and yet when we keep it in its context, it's really not out of place, is it? Because what he's saying in the problem with miserliness, with rubbing the face off every penny, is that we put things over people, and we destroy relationships with people, and that leaves us alone. And alone ain't no good, right? Alone is bad. Why? Because two are better than one. You see how he's going right into the same thought. It's not something new. Solomon sees great value in relationships over money. These are the relationship that the miser denies himself so that he can get more money. There's strength, love, laughter, joy in relationships that we build, and the friendships that we have. In fact, he says that friends accomplish more together when they work together. There are, we might say, tangential rewards that cannot be counted with gold when you have friends, right? This past weekend, we were getting ready for Missouri's wedding, and I had this arch in my garage. I've had it there since October, and needed to get it to Loveland, and I have a van, and it's like 8.5 feet tall. It's bigger than my van. So I was able to call my friend Mark. I said, Mark, got a truck? Would you mind taking this up there? He was going up there anyway. Friends. Now, I guess we could count that in money by how much gas it cost him, but he was already going there, and then so how much extra weight did it burn? You don't count it in the gold. You count it in the intangible, the things that we can't count with dimes and dollars. To be able to do those things. Years ago, I think I've mentioned before that when I was a boy, we late elementary, early junior high, we built a house. We built a log cabin out in the woods. You know, that's every American pioneer's dream, right? My dad took an early retirement from the highway patrol, and we built this house. And he and Mom, you know, they had these logs, those cedar logs, and they used a chainsaw, and they you know, we'd cut a flat side on this side and cut a flat side on that side and stack them up. Well, it came time there was going to be a beam. It was actually two large oak beams that were supported by a massive tree in the middle of the house, and they would go out to the edge. Well, they couldn't lift that log, the two of them. I mean, it's hard enough to lift one cedar log and get it in place with the two of them. And so they called their friends. We were living in southeastern Oklahoma at the time, and most all of their friends were from Oklahoma City area. That's where they both had grown up and worked, and they knew a lot of people. And so we had 30 or 40 people come down from Oklahoma City. We were sleeping on blankets, if you were lucky, on the floor. We had so many people in the house at the time. And we went down to the build site, and we had some tools, some A-frames and chains and all this. And I remember we lifted these beams up and we put them in place. Where would we have been without friends? Without the ability to call on those around us. On the Beatles' 1967 Sgt. Pepper's album, there's a song that John Lennon and Paul McCartney wrote specifically for Ringo Starr to sing. What that means is they made the notes kind of flat, where they didn't go too high, they didn't go too low, because Ringo was not the best singer, but they wanted him to sing lead on this particular song. And the song was "With a Little Help from My Friends." And of course, we know it. And if you don't know the Beatles version, you probably know Joe Cocker's version, which became probably even more famous in a way. But the song, the gist of the song was when things are off or unusual, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be bad. You know, what would you do when your love's gone away? You know, if she's visiting off somewhere, what do you do? And he says, well, I get by with a little help from my friends. That's the idea here. When we have friends, we have good reward for our work, for our toil. We get more done together. There's a principle whenever you make, go from a simple machine to a complex machine. Y'all remember physics and physical science, right? So, a complex machine is made up of simple machines, right? That's the whole point of a complex, is you take the simple ones, like an inclined plane, fulcrums, things like that. So, but the problem is the more complex the machine becomes, the less efficient the simple machines are. Did you know that? Like the pulleys, if you want to hoist something really heavy, you have a block and tackle pulley that's got 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 pulleys together and you pull it right, and you go like this, and you may pull that chain 7, 8, 10 feet, and it raises an inch, right? That's the inefficiency. It's a loss of efficiency. It's easier to lift at that inch than if you had to reach over and actually pull it up, or just had one single pulley, but there's inefficiency there. And so you talk about the efficiency, the sum of its parts, right? Well, when it comes to people working together, we are greater than some of our parts. We, not only can we do more, we defy logic in what we can get done. He goes on and he says, if one falls, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Woe to him. Who's the him that you think he's thinking about? It's the ones earlier. It's this miser who's working just for, he's gaining more and more and more money, and he's not really accomplishing anything. So not only is more work accomplished, but friendship also brings encouragement and aid. Paul would say, if anyone is overtaken in a fault, you who are spiritual, restore them. Galatians 6 and verse 1. When one falls, obviously there's, I think in here in this picture, the idea of falling is falling down, a physical fall, but I think Solomon takes that concept and he says people fall spiritually too. And we need one another. That's why we need the church. Sometimes we minimize the church. I'm going to be a spiritual giant on my own. I'm going to accomplish great things on my own because I'm so spiritually minded and better than everyone else. The church is just kind of an afterthought. If I have time, I may give some time to the church. But other than that, it's all about me accomplishing my spiritual potential. I think what Solomon is telling us is your spiritual potential is diminished greatly when it is not put in with the efforts of the church. No wonder he tells us that we glorify God in his church, that we together accomplish more than we can apart from one another. Again, if two lie together, can they keep warm? But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man may prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. Friendship is about more than just getting more done. It's about survival. I mentioned Paul McCartney already. In 1982, he and Stevie Wonder teamed up on a song. And the song was Ebony and Ivory. Some of you may have heard that. It was not as big a hit, I don't think, as with a little help from my friends. But in the song, the keys of the piano represented the ideal harmony of life where people of all walks of life live side by side. Ebony, the black keys, and ivory, the white keys on the piano. And it says, side by side on my piano keyboard, they live in harmony. Harmony. Black people, white people, brown people. Listen, we're all the same people. We just have different shades. People of all shades live in harmony together. In one of the stanzas, they say, we all know that people are the same wherever you go. There's good and bad in everyone. And we learn to live when we learn to give each other what we need to survive, together alive. That's survival. Friendship brings survival. Life and happiness depend on learning to help one another survive. As he says here, keep warm. What's the value of keeping warm? It's survival, isn't it? Now, this was at a time when Solomon couldn't just go to the thermostat in the living room and bump it up a couple of degrees, right? Keeping warm was much more difficult. It took a lot of work. You know, if you were burning a fire, you had to go cut the tree down. But wasn't it easier to cut the tree down with someone on the other side of the saw? Read.
I'm reminded about his dad. When he got old, King David said, he got no heat.
Got no heat.
So they found him a young
Abishag, that's right. That's one of the... you just love to say the name Abishag, don't you? So Abishag was a young maiden literally brought in as a bed warmer to warm his bed for him. And, sometimes when it's time to go to bed, you lay down in those covers and they're a little cool, right? You know, I don't have an electric blanket on my bed right now. And so, and honestly, I like to slide into cold sheets. Julie does not. We have yet to find a way to heat the sheets on one side of the bed and not the other side. That's but that's one of the things that we face. The survival. Another benefit of friendship is protection and strength. Like they said in the song, I get by with a little help from if someone is standing up against me, if someone is battling me. The old saying, you're not just fighting me, you're fighting all of us. Because when we have friends, there's someone who's got my back, as it were. Don't be lonely by design, which is what you will be if you focus on the material things. Experience the joy of life by finding delight in people. We're losing this ability to find delight in people. What do I mean by that? I'm not saying that we just have so many people that are consumed by greed, which I think is what Solomon's point here is. But even people who aren't consumed by greed are losing delight in people. They're not stepping outside of their comfort zone to meet new people. Focus mostly on family and family relations. It's just about the family and the family relationship. It's not. In fact, the church survives on you stepping outside your family comfort zone and meeting people who are lost and bringing them to the grace of God. Frank?
Everybody has a phone, and the family comes home for dinner, and everybody's using their own device to text and talk and listen to whatever they want to listen to or look at whatever they want to look into rather than, two people be an arm's length away from each other, looking at each other's phone instead of conversing with each other and, socializing. And it's really becoming an epidemic because parents are giving little 2 and 3-year-old children their phone to play with. They're keeping them occupied so that keep busy and we don't have to.
It's a social ineptitude that we are developing by choice. Electronics is just one avenue through which this is happening, but I think that reflects I think we naturally try to eschew awkward situations, right? Do you like to be in awkward situations? No. So most people don't anyway. And so what do? We avoid that, right? Well, I don't know that person, so I don't want the awkwardness of having to walk up to them and introduce myself. They may not like me. They may not respond to me very well. Bad things could happen. And so it's just easier for me to what? Walk away. And when we do that, we're left with a very small circle, and it's usually we share the last name. That is spiritual suicide for every congregation of the Lord's church. No matter how close-knit your family is, if you do not step out and meet new people and bring them to Christ, the church at Brighton will not survive. Ever.
I was just thinking this week, spending time with family, and you don't necessarily get to pick your family, and so there's always those that you have struggles with to get along with, and especially as kids. And so getting all the cousins together, and they're each having to give in to the others because they're all sharing the same family now instead of being in their own home. And kids at school, people out in public, you can avoid those people to a certain extent. Right. Family you can't, but yet it's a great tool to learn how to deal with people.
Yeah, I think that's the social structure that God created, is that parents raise children, and part of raising children is training them to meet strangers. Of course, we don't do that today. Our motto today in American society is what? Don't talk to strangers. Stranger danger. Anyone ever heard of Lenore Schenectady? She's America's Worst Mom. She used to have a blog. She may still have it, but the title of the blog was "Free Range Children," and she was trying to make it where there was a park 2 blocks from her house, and she would let her kids go play in the park. But abductions, right? And like 95% of abductions in America of children are done by what? By who? People they know, relatives, uncles, stepfathers, estranged mothers, people they know. The likelihood that a stranger actually nabs your child is so infinitesimal that she said it's not really a danger. Now, she got that moniker of America's Worst Mom because I believe she had a 10-year-old son, put him on the subway to go to a baseball game by himself to watch, I think, the Mets play, the New York Mets. And he went to the game, she put him on the subway, he went there by himself, went to the game, came back, got on the subway, and came home, and she picked him up. And it was to prove a point that kids are capable of some things. And when he got home, he told his mom some of the people that he met on the subway. Now, I'm not telling you need to go put your kids 10 years old on the subway in New York City and say, hope to see you in a couple hours. I think that's a little foolish, and it's probably well-deserved, worst mom in America. But I do think we need to start teaching kids how to meet and talk to strangers in a responsible way, because there is a way to do it. And if we can't teach them that, then we're giving in to the breakdown of social adequacy. So what do we do? How do we change these things? How do we build relationships that are lasting? How do we build relationships that are going to keep us warm and that are not quickly broken, that are able to withstand? That, you know, how do you get these kinds of people around you? I got 4 ideas. You may have some others, but number 1 is that we need to cultivate and protect your friends, your friendships. Sometimes we meet people and then we don't cultivate that friendship, right? Sometimes you got to call them up, say, how are you doing? You got to keep in touch with them. You know, sometimes you get in those friendships, and I'm sure you've been in them, where it seems like it's all one-sided, right? You're the one always going to their house. You're the one that's always calling them, and you're the one that's always checking up on them. You're the one that's always doing this, and there seems to be no reciprocity in the relationship. Well, maybe we're not cultivating it right. There's a right way and a wrong way to cultivate plants, right? People cultivate in different ways. Find the way that cultivates a friendship and protect it. When you've got a good friend, don't mess it up. Number 2, I would say develop friendships through willful acts of enjoyment. Isn't that what Solomon is saying? Enjoy life. But don't enjoy it alone. Enjoy it with people. Find people to enjoy life with and make it willful. Number 3, maintain friendships through acts of courtesy and sensitivity. And number 4, stay in touch with friends. We have to do these things. And listen, of all the evangelistic methods that the church has ever tried, the most effective is you bring in a friend. That's it. That's the most effective. Sure. 1, cultivate and protect your friends. 2, develop friendships through willful acts of enjoyment. 3, maintain friendships through acts of courtesy and sensitivity. And 4, stay in touch with friends. That's how we can develop friends. Now, I used to think that I was raising kids when my boys were little. And then it dawned on me one time, I'm not raising children. I'm raising adults. And part of adulting, we verbed that word now, part of adulting is being able to create friendships. And so if you're raising children or grandchildren, instill some of these principles in them. After all, when it comes right down to it, who's going to attend your funeral? It's going to be friends and families, not clients and sales reps. They're going to be on another call. It's your friends and family that are going to attend your funeral. Better was a poor and wise youth than an old foolish king who no longer knew how to take advice. For he went from prison to throne, though in his own kingdom he had been but poor. The 4th lament that the preacher seems to have is the pursuit of popularity. When we try to turn those relationships into the goal of the relationship is that they admire and that I'm popular among the wide group of people. I can't help but when I read this to see, better was a poor and wise youth than an old foolish king. To see one who was poor and wise at one time and then became an old foolish king. That kind of has the life of several people, but I kind of see David in that, in a way. You know, he was out, a shepherd boy. He had the wisdom to trust in God when he faced Goliath. You know, had great acts of faith. And then when he became king, you know, he made bad decisions with Bathsheba and Uriah. You know, this old foolish king. He went from prison to throne. I not only see David, even though David technically wasn't in prison, what about Joseph, who went from prison in Egypt to second in command after only Pharaoh? He had authority over everything in Egypt except Pharaoh. Though in his own kingdom he had been poor. David, of course, was pursued hotly by Saul, but ultimately came to the throne of the kingdom. But he came from nothingness, a shepherd boy, into Bethlehem. And the problem is that fame and popularity is fickle. He goes on to say, I saw all the living who move about under the sun, along with that youth who was to stand in the king's place. So he's still referring back to verse 14 here. He says, there was no end of all the people, all of whom he led, yet those who came later, or who come later, will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is a vanity and a striving after the wind. And so, you know, he's gone from humble beginnings. He's now king of the palace. He should have the adoration and the appreciation of all the people that he leads, and yet that doesn't quite happen, right? Because fame is fickle. Well, how fickle is it, right? You know, that's what. How fickle is it? Well, there was no end of people who were upset with the king, right? No end of all the people, all of whom he led. They were coming with this problem and this complaint and gripe and everything else. Even after he is gone, the king, he will be blamed incessantly for the decisions he made. And it almost sounds like American politics, doesn't it? Anything good happening in the present administration, oh, well, that was started in the past administration. And anything bad that's happening in the present administration, well, that's his fault. Right? We see it over and over and over again. And it doesn't matter who's in power. Republicans or Democrats or, you know, if ever, an independent candidate or a third party or anything like that. Doesn't matter who's in power. When something good is going on, there's always going to be some, well, that was because of the last king. Just like there's some on the other side who are going to say, well, you know, he had to correct all the things from the last king or the last president or last whatever the leader of the nation might be in whatever nation it is. Want to be a famous actor? Maybe you don't want to be a politician. There's too much mud throwing in. I want to be a famous actor, right? Well, don't make a bad film. I remember years ago there was an actor, I say years ago, a decade or two ago, won an Oscar. It was Cuba Gooding Jr. Y'all remember that name? Had a fantastic film. Then he came out with a movie called Snow Dogs, and it pretty much killed his career. It was like, you know, what can I do to kill my career where everyone will forget my name? And he said, I know, I'll make this movie. And he did, and people forgot. A phenomenal actor, and yet one bad movie is all it takes. Or, you know, worse, if you are going to be one of those who are popular for your natural beauty, don't put on 10 pounds. Don't get a wrinkle. Don't lose Reed's hair. You see, the people that are, think of those who are popular right now, those who have the greatest attention. We'll say American culture. We could say worldwide, but let's just say American culture right now. Think of those whose names, people, or whose talents and skills and things that people appreciate. And how many of those can lose what they're famous for? Beauty, athleticism. How often are some of our heroes sports heroes, right? What was it, last weekend? Alabama's quarterback, or 2 weeks ago, Tua Tagovailoa, kid from Hawaii playing at Alabama. Phenomenal talent. Phenomenal talent. You'll never hear me say any other good thing about Alabama's football team than that. But he was a phenomenal talent. And he may have ended his, not just his season, but his football career with a hip injury. And it was a promising career. Y'all remember the name Bo Jackson? Right? I mean, Bo was everywhere, right? Happened to have suffered the same injury that this young man suffered last week or 2 weeks ago. Most look at Bo Jackson. He was not in his prime yet when that injury occurred. He was still on the way up, and then it was all cut off.
A lot of them are the lucky ones, though. You look at the real successful. The biggest people that have ever been in each thing, the biggest singers, Elvis Presley, killed himself. Michael Jackson killed himself. All these really, really famous people, those are probably the lucky ones that don't make it. Because the ones that are bigger than what they're doing.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Ron?
One of the things that Solomon says here is they don't know how to receive the, as he says, admonition anymore.
Yeah.
They can do it all on their own, and they're not open to learn.
Right. I think we tend to get to that point where we think, I'm here because of me, and I'll stay here because of me. When in reality, we rarely get there because of that. Life is hard. Don't make it harder by trying to make it up as you go along. Don't try to do it on your own. Find those friends. Surround yourself with the people that will get you close. That was the second bell, right? Okay. All right. So we'll pick up in chapter 5 next week. I appreciate your attention and great comment, Ron. I really appreciate that. The inability to take advice or admonition. We need to be open. Love you guys.